Genoa smelled of the sea, salt, tar, and the faint bite of fish drying in the sun. Ships clattered against the docks like restless beasts, and young Christopher lingered among them long after his father called him home. Where other boys chased each other through narrow alleys, Christopher stood silently on the stones, watching the sails billow and collapse like the lungs of giants. He asked sailors endless questions. Where had they been? What storms had swallowed them? What wonders waited beyond the line where sea met sky? Most brushed him off, but a few old mariners humored the curious boy. Their tales were rough, colored with exaggeration, but to Christopher they were scripture. He grew up in a house filled with wool scraps and loom dust. His father assumed he'd follow the trade, but Christopher's eyes were always turned outward, to the ships leaving at dawn and returning at dusk with secrets in their hulls. By his early teens he knew, whatever life awaited him, it would not be spent behind a loom. At 14, he signed onto a trading vessel. The ship wasn't grand, just a solid wooden frame creaking under the weight of barrels. But to Christopher, it was a cathedral. He learned quickly. The sea was not gentle, and the men were not patient. But the boy absorbed every lesson, tying knots, reading the wind, repairing sails under moonlight. During long nights, he studied the stars. When a sailor pointed to Polaris, Christopher memorized its place. The sky became a map only he could read. Then came the pirate attack, a thunder of oars against water, the shadow of a black-sailed ship rising like a nightmare. Steel clashed, flames swallowed the rigging, and the Mediterranean turned red. Christopher survived by leaping into the sea, clinging to a plank from the shattered hull. For hours the waves tossed him, the sun burning his skin. When he finally washed ashore on the Portuguese coast, coughing salt and smoke, he understood something profound. The sea demanded everything from a man, and he was willing to give it. Lisbon was alive with possibility. Traders, scholars, and sailors crowded the streets, carrying spices, stories, and strange instruments used to measure the heavens. Portugal was the beating heart of Europe's maritime world, and Christopher felt he had stumbled into destiny. He found work on ships and spent every spare moment in taverns and map shops, haunting the tables of navigators who traced lines across parchment like prophets reading the future. He read accounts of Marco Polo, studied ancient maps, and debated with anyone who would endure his stubborn theories. One idea lodged in him like a hook. If a ship sailed west instead of east, it could reach the Indies faster. Most dismissed him. "The ocean is endless," they said. "You don't know its moods," others warned. Christopher married Felipa Moniz, a noblewoman gentler than anyone he had known. Through her family's connections, he gained access to secret charts from Portuguese explorers. Their son, Diego, brought him joy, but tragedy followed swiftly. Felipa died young. Grief hollowed him, yet it also sharpened his resolve. He promised himself and her memory that he would prove the world wrong. He spent years petitioning Portugal's king to back his westward voyage. Each time, the council dismissed him, politely or not so politely. His calculations were flawed, they argued. The distance to Asia was far greater than he claimed. He was a dreamer, not a navigator. But dreamers are stubborn. Christopher packed up his life and traveled to Spain instead, carrying little more than letters, maps, and a fierce sense of destiny. He lived in boarding houses, borrowed ink to rewrite proposals, and begged nobles for audiences. Some found him eccentric, others admired his conviction. All turned him away. He persisted. Hope flickered during meetings with Queen Isabella, a devout woman fascinated by exploration. Even then, approval slipped through his fingers. Years passed. Christopher aged under the Spanish sun, but he refused to bend. The Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were sturdy but aging vessels. Their crews were braver on paper than in spirit. Some joined out of hunger, others to escape the law. Many whispered that their captain was mad. On the morning of August 3rd, 1492, villagers gathered to watch the fleet depart from Palos. Bells tolled, gulls screamed overhead, and Christopher stood on the Santa Maria's deck, feeling the weight of every expectation, Spain's, his crew's, his own. The wind filled the sails. Spain shrank into a thin line behind them. Ahead lay a stretch of water the crew called the Sea of Darkness, filled with myths of monsters and whirlpools. Christopher hid his fear beneath calm certainty. A captain did not tremble. A captain burned the way forward. At first, the ocean was kind. Warm breezes carried them west and spirits remained high. But once they left the Canary Islands behind, the world became a spinning, sun-baked void of blue. Days blended. The compass spun strangely at night. Birds vanished. Clouds rarely formed. Men grumbled. Some cursed the admiral under their breath. Others openly challenged him. "There is no land," they shouted. "We sailed to our graves." Christopher gathered them on the deck. His voice did not shake. "We turn back now, we return with nothing but shame. We go forward, we change the world." It wasn't just bravado. Somewhere beneath fear and exhaustion, he truly believed he was close. He watched floating branches, drifting weeds, flocks of birds flying west as if guiding him. On October 12, a sailor on the Pinta cried out, "Land!" The crews erupted with joy. Christopher felt his knees buckle under the weight of relief. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to whisper a prayer. The island was lush, emerald, alive with the scent of flowers unfamiliar to European senses. The people who lived there approached with curiosity rather than fear. Christopher offered gifts, beads, bells, simple trinkets that glimmered in the sun. In return, they shared food, shells, and small pieces of gold that made the Spaniards' eyes widen. Christopher believed he had reached the outskirts of Asia. He searched the islands, Cuba, Hispaniola, convinced that the Emperor of China or the markets of India must be near. He mapped coastlines that no European had ever seen. He negotiated, traded, and sometimes clashed with the people whose lands he claimed in Spain's name. In his ambition, he failed to imagine that he was standing on an entirely new continent. When the Santa Maria ran aground, Christopher salvaged wood to build a small fort. He left a group of men behind, promising to return with supplies. Then he turned toward Spain, carrying news that would ignite Europe. Spain welcomed him like a conqueror. Bells rang, nobles bowed. The king and queen received him in brilliant halls, filled with tapestries and incense. Christopher knelt, presenting parrots, precious stones, and a handful of indigenous people as proof of his triumph. Spain erupted into fevered excitement. If one man with 3 small ships could cross the ocean, imagine what 17 ships could do. But behind the celebrations lurked whispers. Scholars questioned his findings. Rivals envied his sudden fame. Some wondered whether he embellished the truth. Christopher didn't care. He had the Queen's favor, and that was enough. He demanded more ships, more men, more resources. He no longer imagined himself merely as a navigator. He imagined himself a builder of empires. His later voyages were darker than the first. He struggled to govern colonies. He clashed with settlers hungry for gold that did not exist. Some accused him of cruelty. Others blamed him for the hardships they faced. His authority slipped like sand through his fingers. Storms wrecked ships. Sickness spread. Spain's officials began to question whether they had placed too much faith in the Genoese sailor. In 1500, he was arrested and shipped home in chains. The humiliation nearly crushed him. Queen Isabella ordered the chains removed, but did not restore his full powers. Still, Christopher begged for one final chance, one last voyage. In 1502, he sailed again, battered by tempests and betrayal. His ship splintered against reefs, and he spent months stranded on Jamaica, his crew starving and desperate. The ocean he had loved all his life seemed determined to break him. He returned to Spain exhausted, sick, and forgotten by those who once celebrated him. Christopher Columbus died in 1506, surrounded not by cheering crowds, but by a few loyal friends and his sons. He still believed he had reached Asia. He died unaware that he had altered the world's geography forever. His legacy would become complicated, celebrated by some, condemned by others. But strip away the politics and the centuries of history, and one truth remains. He was a man carried forward by a wild, unshakable belief in the horizon. From the boy at the docks of Genoa to the battered admiral of his final days, he chased a dream that refused to leave him. And though the world remembers him in many ways, one image endures. Christopher Columbus standing on the deck of his ship, staring west, convinced that something waited for him just beyond the edge of the known world.